During the first century, most people around the Mediterranean Sea lived in densely packed cities, all ruled by the Roman Empire.
Each city was a diverse blend of cultures, ethnicities, and religions.
And because of this, there were all sorts of temples for offering sacrifices to all sorts of gods, and each person had their own portfolio of gods that they gave their allegiance to.
But in every city, you'd also find a minority group who wouldn't worship any gods but their own. The Israelites, also known as the Jews. They claimed that their God was the one true creator and king of the world.
Now, all these cities were connected by a network of roads built by the Roman Empire, and so it was easy to move around, to do business, and even spread new ideas.
Now, one person familiar with these roads was the Apostle Paul. He spent the second half of his life traveling from city to city, announcing that Israel's God had appointed a new king over the nations.
This king wasn't like anyone who'd come before.
Right. Most kings rule with aggression or power, but this new king rules with self-sacrifice and love. His name is Jesus, and Paul is his herald, who's inviting all people to live under this king's rule.
The stories of Paul's travels and how people received this message, that's what the third part of Acts is all about. For some time, Paul's home base had been in the city of Antioch. And from there, he and his co-workers went out on 3 road trips, traveling by land and by sea to strategic cities throughout the empire.
In each city, Paul's custom was to go first to the Jewish synagogue where his people gathered. He'd start teaching and showing how the Messianic king promised in the Hebrew scriptures is Jesus of Nazareth.
And some believed this news. Others didn't. And still others thought this message was so misleading and dangerous, they would incite riots to kick Paul out of town.
And so that's when Paul would take to the bustling city marketplace. He would set up shop there to make and sell leather tents to cover his travel expenses. And here, Paul kept sharing the news about the risen King Jesus with anybody who would listen.
He was often misunderstood as just promoting a new god. One time he prayed for a sick person, they were healed, and everyone around thought he must be a Greek god that came down to visit them.
But Paul insisted there's only one true God, and he was his servant. This message often stirred up opposition and more riots, and he got beaten, even thrown in jail.
Why such a strong reaction?
Well, the worship of the gods held together Roman culture. They believed the gods kept their cities safe, and the temple worship of the gods was a huge part of their economy. Paul wasn't just adding Jesus as a new god to the list, he was saying all other gods are powerless, even a sham.
So he's undermining their way of life.
Yes, and more than that. When Paul announced Jesus as a new king, he would call him Lord or Son of God, the very titles people used to refer to the emperor of Rome.
So Paul's message could easily be heard as a threat against the entire political order. Why would anyone join this movement? I mean, it sounds dangerous.
Well, people were captivated by the story of Jesus and how his love created communities where all people were treated as equals, regardless of ethnicity, gender, or economic status. These people formed new families that would eat together. They lived sacrificially and took care of their poor.
They lived like Jesus actually was the king.
Right. And so in every city where Paul announced the message about Jesus, people were being transformed by God's Spirit to become new kinds of humans.
So Paul would stay in that city and teach them the way of Jesus.
And then he would leave for a new city.
This was a difficult life. Paul had to endure a lot of pain and a lot of suffering.
Yeah, and he did so because he believed that his own hardships were a reenactment of Jesus' suffering and death for others. He said it was God's own love that drove him to share the story of Jesus, no matter the cost.
After his third road trip, Paul's reputation had grown. He had made many new friends, but had also made many new enemies that he would be wise to avoid.
But Paul didn't avoid them. His next stop was Jerusalem, a city full of people who wanted him arrested, even dead. And so why he goes to Jerusalem and what happens when he gets there, that's what the final section of Acts is all about.
Welcome to week 8 of the New Testament Challenge. This week we're continuing our reading that shows the ministry from early followers of Jesus. Much of the reading for this week focuses on Paul, his missionary journeys, and his letters. Paul is one of the top MVPs of the Christian faith, for sure. Paul was unstoppable, and he was a church-obsessed maniac in the best way. He and a guy named Barnabas get sent out to do missions in the beginning of this week's reading, and then God uses Paul in some dramatic and incredible ways. Let me just say, these missions were not like our mission trips now. We have trains, planes, cars. He had his feet, maybe a donkey or horse, and boats. We have sunscreen, dry fit clothing, and our hokas, and he did not. Our mission trips are still very important and refining to our faith, but we do not sacrifice nearly as much as Paul did for his. In 2 Corinthians 11, he just lists the different challenges that he experienced along the way. And he says, quote, "I've been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have known hunger and thirst. I have been cold and naked." And that's just one passage describing the terrible treatment he received on his mission trips. The crazy thing, crazier than all that, is that he did not care. When he was thrown in jail, he used that time to literally write letters to young churches and guide them and encourage them. He also worshiped in jail, prayed in jail, and ministered to the jail workers. In fact, one time when they got released from jail, they went straight to the jail worker's house to baptize their whole family. See, MVP behavior. So HSM, here's the $1 million question. What turned this persecutor of the church, this guy that was willing to kill Christians, into a church-loving maniac? Literally, how does that happen? Why would he endure the obstacles, the persecution, the difficult travel, and repeatedly risk his life for the church? Why? Here's what I think. I think it was because Paul was a true believer of the original vision and purpose of the church. I think the vision of the first church in Acts 2 captured his heart and passion, and he gave his life for that vision. And I think anybody who ever says, "I love Jesus, but I just don't go to church," or "I love Jesus, but I just don't like church," has never grasped the magnificence of a church when it's really working as God intended. So what is this vision? Let's go back to a passage from last week's reading. It says, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved." He was so obsessed with this vision that he risked his life to spread it so everyone could experience this church. This is why Eastside and HSM have values that match Acts 2:42 through 47. They're literally on the walls of our church and influence all the plans we make. This is why we pursue God, build community, and unleash compassion, and continue to open more churches that do that. So here's my prayer for us, that when we come in here and we gather together, that we have the same spirit as the first church. And instead of coming together out of obligation or just to socialize, we would come together to pursue God. When our community genuinely seeks God, we mirror the first church and are a place that has the right priority at the front of all that we do. My next prayer for us, that we will be a high school ministry where people genuinely build community with one another. Like those first believers, when we meet, we would give everyone a place to belong, to love and be loved, to serve and be served, to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. When we genuinely build community, we mirror the first church and create a place for people to meet Jesus and grow in their faith. My last prayer is that, like the early church, wherever we go, whoever we come in contact with, we will unleash compassion. As we read, they even sold their possessions and goods to meet the needs of one another. There was this selfless service that marked the early church. When we sacrificially unleash compassion, we mirror the early church and show God's love for others and each other in a tangible way. Friends, this was the unstoppable vision the Apostle Paul gave his life for. He gave his life for a vision where people pursue God and build community and unleash compassion in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. This is the church we're striving to be at Eastside and HSM. So for you, as we reflect on Paul's mission, what do you need to focus on? Maybe you need to understand and fall in love with the vision of the church for the first time. Maybe you need to figure out how you can pursue God more intentionally at HSM, or build community more intentionally, or unleash compassion more intentionally. Let's talk more about what that could look like in our small group time.